began several weeks back on building better local churches. We made the point in our first lesson that there are many different local churches that we read of in the New Testament, some approved of by God and some were unapproved of. Some were known for their strength and others were not as strong. And what we said we need to do is we need to realize that we need to be working to build a better local church. No matter what condition the church is in, there's always room for growth and room for improvement, and we need to be striving for that growth and for that improvement. We began that series of lessons by talking about an introduction to the local church. So we talked about understanding what the local church is, and about the importance of the local church, how that's how God's work is carried out through the local church. Excuse me, we talked about how one becomes a member of a local church. That evening we continued that study by talking about understanding local church membership. We talked about what it does not mean. It does not mean one is just automatically approved up by God. It does not mean that we have our ticket punched into heaven. It doesn't mean that we are, it doesn't mean that we're necessarily part of the universal church. One may be accepted in the local church and yet not be part of the universal church. We talk about the importance of local church membership, that's how elders can exercise their oversight. We talk about the privileges of being a member of a local church when we talk about its responsibilities. A couple of weeks ago, then, we talked about building better local churches by building better relationships with one another. And we talked about how we used to by understanding the nature of our relationships with one another, by possessing the right attitude, and by understanding our responsibilities in our relationship. And then last week, we talked about building better relationships by each part, or building better local church by each part doing its share. We need to understand that everyone has a part. We need to understand that we need to be equipping everybody to do their part. We need to be eliminating excuses for not doing our part. And we need to recognize the consequence if I do not do my part. We're going to continue that study this morning, that series this morning, by talking about building better local churches by striving to be scripturally organized. Striving to be scripturally organized. Now, there are 5 conditions of organization when it comes to the local church. And here's what I mean by the 5 conditions. The first of those is scripturally organized. We're going to talk about that this morning. That's how we qualified elders and deacons. Then there is scripturally unorganized. That would be, we don't have a plurality of men qualified. So you're in a congregation, they don't have elders, but they don't have a plurality of men qualified. Well, then they can't have elders. And so they're unorganized. They're not what they need to be organization-wise, but they're scripturally unorganized. They can't be scripturally organized. There then is unscripturally organized. What do we mean by that? Well, there's unqualified men serving as elders and deacons. Then there is unscripturally unorganized. A congregation has men that are qualified to serve as elders and deacons, and yet they're not serving. And then there is super organized. That's where you have congregations that have all the organizations, the youth organization, all this. And those are super organized. They try to divide everything down to a bunch of organizations within the church outside of God's plan. That would be one super organized. We mostly focus on talking about the first 4. Scripturally organized, scripturally unorganized, unscripturally organized, and unscripturally unorganized. Again, we want to focus on the first of those this morning by striving to be scripturally organized. Let's talk about being scripturally organized by, first and foremost, understanding that it is God's will for the church to have elders. It's God's will for the church to have elders. Go to Acts chapter 14 with me. In Acts chapter 14, as Paul's going back through after his first missionary journey, or preaching journey, and he's going back through, he appoints elders in every church. So in Acts chapter 14, and in verse 23, it says, "And when they had appointed elders for them in every church, with prayer and fasting, they committed them to the Lord in whom they had believed." And so Paul's going through here in these earlier chapters, and the first journey is 13 and 14. He goes through and he preaches at these places and establishes churches on his way out. And on his way back, they go back through and they appoint elders in every church. Why? Because that's part of God's plan. In fact, if there are not elders, something is lacking. In Titus 1 and in verse 5, in the passage that was read for us a moment ago, it says, "This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order." Others would say to set in order the things that are lacking. That is, when there's no elders, when one's not then there's something lacking. They're not scripturally organized. It's not that an eldership is just a pretty good idea. That's God's plan for what He wants. When there's no elder, something's lacking. The NIV says in that passage to straighten out what was left unfinished. So if you go about to every church, this Titus' job here, he's in Crete. He needs to appoint elders in every town, or to straighten out what was left unfinished. That needs to be done. It's not finished. It needs to be straightened out. The Christian Standard Bible will say what was left. I said the word what was left undone. Right, something's lacking. It's not what it needs to be, and so because of that, there needs to be elders, qualified men appointed in every church. And so it tells me something about the importance of elders, that when Paul comes back through, here he goes, in his first journey, they're establishing elders, appointing elders in every church. And that when he writes to Titus, he says, appointing elders is setting in order what's lacking. There's something missing. There's something not completely according to God's plan when there's not elders. Now again, there are times there may not be qualified men. That's what scripturally unorganized is. But it's God's plan, it's God's desire that there be elders in every church. So we want to strive to be scripturally organized, and we are now, but we want to strive to be scripturally organized not just now, but for years to come. We need to start by understanding, is God's will for the church to have elders? But we don't only need to understand is God's will for the church to have elders. We need to strive to be scripturally organized by understanding the church needs elders. Not just because it's God's plan. Obviously we do it because it's God's plan. He said there's something like you when they're not there. But there are other reasons that the Bible would point out why the church needs elders. Let's understand this. We need to understand that the church needs elders because elders provide mature and knowledgeable leadership. The church is comprised of both mature and immature members. So that we are no longer Ephesians 4:14. Children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine. In 1 Thessalonians 5:14, we urge you, brothers, to admonish the disorderly, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, and be patient with them all. There are those who are spiritually mature, those who've been Christians for longer, those who have a deeper understanding, and there are those who may be spiritually immature. Either spiritually immature because they've not had the time to grow, or sometimes spiritually immature because there's not been enough study and growing, as with those in the book of Hebrews chapter 5. But either way, a church is made up of individuals where you'll have mature and immature individuals. In a case where there are no elders, in the absence of elders, the mature and the immature have an equal part and equal input. So when you don't have elders, you go to a men's meeting. You may have somebody in there that's a mature Christian, somebody that has the wisdom to know what to do, and somebody else who's more immature, who hasn't had the time to develop yet, and they have equal input as to what's going to be done for the church going forward. And so when you have equal input from those who have wisdom and those who do not, there are times where one may side with those with less wisdom. Remember that Rehoboam did, the son of Solomon, where he listened to those who were not as mature, not as wise. And so in the absence of elders, when you go to that meeting, there are those mature and immature who have the equal amount of input. And it may be that having that leadership, there could be decisions made that are not best because of the decisions being made by those who are not as mature spiritually and do not have the wisdom yet. And so we need to understand that elders provide this mature and knowledgeable leadership. In fact, that's why God said they could not be a recent convert. In 1 Timothy 3 and verse 6, it says he must not be a recent convert. Now we're going to go to this in a moment in our next point. But let's understand this as they tie together. We're going to talk in a minute about how they're defending against apostasy. And we need to understand that if you've got somebody that's a recent convert and you put them in the place of an elder and they're making decisions and they don't have the maturity yet, there's going to be some problems. They're not ready to recruit yet. That's why elders are not to be recent converts. They're to provide that mature, that knowledgeable leadership. Excuse me. Not only that, elders are needed to protect the local church. Look at Acts chapter 20 with me. In Acts chapter 20, this is Paul's address to the Ephesian elders. And as Paul addressed them in Acts 20, and then when he opened his final address to them face to face, as he's fixing to go to prison, he said, "Pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock, in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to care for the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood. I know that after my departure, fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock, and from among your own selves will rise men speaking twisted things to draw away the disciples. Therefore, be alert." Here as Paul is talking to the Ephesian elders, he's reminding them to pay attention to the flock among them. They are the elders, they are the overseers of the church here in Ephesus, and they need to pay careful attention because there are going to be some wolves coming in. And they're going to start drawing away some of those that are there in the church. In fact, I think the indication is that later on there would actually become apostasy from the eldership itself. Because he says from among your own selves. And that the others need to be careful because either whether it's one that's there then or one may be appointed later, there might be one who would bring about and draw away some others from something they were teaching. And the other's job was to watch out and to be careful so that way they could help the flock to avoid and to be ready for that to come. And when that teaching did come, to properly deal with it. But not only are elders needed to protect the local church, in the Acts 20 tells us that, but Titus 1 does, where he talked about in the passage how they need to be able to exhort those who believe the sound doctrine, but reprove or rebuke those who contradict it. Verse 9 would tell us that. He would go on in verse 10 through 13 talking about those that were insubordinate and talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision, and Paul said they must be silent. So they're insubordinate or rebellious people that engage in idle talk, empty talk, who were upsetting the whole families or something. And what the elders were doing was watching out for the flock so that they could take care of that. Again, they were to reprove or rebuke those who contradict. So here this apostasy is taking place, and the job of the elders is to look out for the flock, make sure they're being properly fed, as Peter would point out. And then when they see something outside of that, they needed to rebuke that flock. Because what was happening is there were those who were being drawn away. We want to build a better local church that being scripturally organized. We need to start by understanding that God's plan, and by understanding the local church needs elders because they provide mature and eligible leadership. They are needed to protect the local church, and the elders are needed to watch for souls. Acts 20:28, we already saw, pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock. In Hebrews 13 and verse 17, it said, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls. That's the responsibility of elders. To pay careful attention to themselves, and to pay careful attention to the flock. To keep watch over the souls of the flock. How do they do that? How do they watch out over our souls? I think there are four things that's very important about it to point out as to how they do that. Number one, they do so by making sure we're properly fed. In 1 Peter 5 and verse 2 it says, shepherd the flock of God that is among you. Some translations talk about feeding the flock. It's the role and responsibility of elders to make sure that the sheep, that those of the congregation are getting a balanced diet of teaching from God's Word. To make sure they get the things that are necessary for them to be built up. So how do elders watch out for souls? Well, they do so by making sure that the sheep are properly fed. They do so by marking and removing divisive men. I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those, Romans 16:17, who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have been taught, and avoid them. We all need to be avoiding those who are these divisive individuals, to be noting those who are contrary to doctrine, to sound doctrine. When there's elders, their job is identifying that and then dealing with that before it becomes a problem. Or becomes more of a problem. And so they note and remove those who are contrary to sound doctrine. They identify and deal with the weak and feeble-minded. We saw 1 Thessalonians 5:14 earlier. This is a responsibility to all of us, but in particular it's a responsibility of elders to admonish the disorderly, encourage the faint-hearted or feeble, help the weak, be patient with the moral. You see, elders are watching out for souls. They're looking out and identifying those that are weak. Going to the illustration of a shepherd for a moment, if you were taking care of a flock, you have a flock of sheep, and you're taking care of them, there are some sheep that may be stronger than others that may be able to get away if the wolf starts to come. But you watch out, and when you see the one that may be sick or weak, that's the one you may keep a closer eye on because you need to help them out in that case. But you want to try to strengthen them, to nurse them back to health. The responsibility of elders is identifying those that are weak and feeble-minded and helping to strengthen them so that they are what they need to be. And then that's done by admonishing them. We ask you, brothers, to respect those who labor among you. He's talking about elders. And are over you in the Lord. That's again an indication that it's elders. And admonish you. Respect those who labor among you, over you, and admonish you. And that's part of the responsibility of elders. So we want to try to be scripturally organized. How do we do that? We start by understanding it's God's will. Then we need to understand that the church needs elders. What we want to do here for the rest of our time this morning is talk about signs that the church is trying to be scripturally organized. We can sit back and we can say, well, we know that the Lord wants the church. It's God's will for the church to have elders. We'll all agree. We need to understand that they play an important role. I think we'd all agree on that. But what are some signs that tell us we're looking out and we're making sure that we're striving for that not just now but in the future? What are some signs? Well, the first sign the church is striving to be scripturally organized is the church has a desire to have elders. We're going to come back later on and talk about the individuals having desire, but the church needs to desire to have elders. You see, there are not all congregations that have desire to have elders. There are congregations that are content to sort of go with the status quo and we'll keep on with how things are and we'll just keep having these meetings. Even though there may be those qualified to serve, they don't want to appoint elders. Some men are afraid that they will lose their input if elders are appointed. But now I have input in everything that's done, and if they appoint elders, I'm going to lose that input. And so we're not going to, so I don't think we need to appoint elders. Some men argue against appointing elders because of someone they knew and qualified. Well, I knew brother so-and-so, and he was appointed, and he wasn't qualified. That may be. Are there times there are people that are appointed that are unqualified? Yes. But that doesn't mean that every man is unqualified. And there are those who would argue against appointing elders because, well, I knew so-and-so, and he was appointed, but he wasn't qualified to serve like everybody thought he was. Just because this brother wasn't qualified and he was appointed doesn't mean this brother's not. Look at the qualifications. Is he qualified? And if they are, if there are plurality of men qualified, then one should appoint elders. You see, its goal should be before us and something we should be praying about. Now, Colossians 1 is a prayer for growth. The part of growth for a congregation is praying to grow to the point that you can be scripturally organized if you're not, or that you can maintain that for the future if you are. And so in Colossians 1, Paul prayed, and so from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of His will, and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing Him, bearing in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. Now that doesn't have to do again specifically with others, but I think there's a point there, that their prayer was for growth, and what we need to pray for is our growth as a congregation. We need to pray that the congregation be filled with knowledge and wisdom to understand the importance of elders and to have that desire. That there be men who have that desire, who are filled with knowledge and wisdom to be able to fill that role. Because it takes knowledge and wisdom to fill that role. And that we can do what is most pleasing to Him. Yes, if there are unqualified, then the church needs to be scripturally unorganized. But our goal should be what God's plan is, and that is to be scripturally organized. And so a church needs to set that goal before them. Now, desire to have elders. Yes, even though we have elders now, what's our goal down the road? And we should be striving to work for that in the future. But not only does the sign of the congregation strive to be scripturally organized, that the congregation has a desire, It's that men have a desire to serve as elders. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 3. 1 Timothy chapter 3. 1 Timothy 3 entitled one of the qualifications of elders. Now, we're not spending our time on this morning. That's a study, that's a whole study in itself. Right now, we're just getting an understanding of the importance of striving to be scripturally organized. But in giving the qualifications in 1 Timothy 3 and verse 1, he says, this saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of an overseer, he desires a noble task. Now, I believe, and I've heard others that argue differently, but I believe 1 Timothy 3 and in verse 1 is the first qualification. And that is, there needs to be a desire to serve in that capacity as an elder. One needs to have that desire to serve in that capacity. Now, we'll come back in a moment and talk about why that desire should be there. But it needs to have that desire to do so because it's a noble task. Now, there are two words, and we're going to come back to the aspire in the English Standard, the first part in a minute. Right now, we're looking at the word rendered desire for the latter half. He desires a noble task. That word desire, according to lexicographer's Lawanite, means to greatly desire, to do or to have something, to long for, to desire very much. And so the idea is that they're desiring for this office, that they're striving for that, is they desire to meet that qualification very much to get to that point to serve. To be able to serve. In fact, that word rendered desire in the English Standard Version, in Luke 15:16 is rendered longing. You know the story of Luke 15, the three stories, the three lost things. There was the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost boy, the lost son. And the lost son, in Luke 15, remember, he goes out and he's working for this man, and it comes to the point that he was so hungry, he was longing to be fed with the pods that the swine ate. That word longing, it's our word desire. So not only is it word longing, in Luke 15, in Luke 22:15 it says, and he said to them, with fervent desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Where Jesus talked about his desire to eat the Passover with the disciples. And in the New King James renders it, he had a fervent desire. That's our word, rendered desire here. That's explaining to it that the intensity with which one should desire to come to that, to meet those qualifications, to serve as an elder. There's a longing for or a fervent desire. Why should men desire to serve as elders? There may be those who desire to serve as elders because, serve as elders and I'm in the leadership role and I get to make the decisions. That's the wrong attitude. That's not what there's a longing for. The longing for is for men to aspire to serve as elders because they understand it's a good or a noble work. And when anyone aspires to the office of an overseer, he desires a noble task. It's a noble task. It's an important task. It's a task that if there's not those serving in that capacity, something's missing. And you may not realize how much it's missing till you've had elders and then you don't have them. Or you haven't had them and then you finally get elders, then you realize how important a role they fill. It's a good and noble task. Men should desire it, though, not just because it's a noble task, but because we should want to help people go to heaven. That should be the goal of all of us, to help others get to heaven. But in serving in the capacity of an elder, there are other things that are given explaining just how much responsibility elders bear for watching out for the flock. So, one should have that desire because they should desire to help people go to heaven by watching out for their souls. Again, Hebrews 13:17. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls. They are watching out. They are looking for those that are weak, as we said earlier, and trying to help them. And when one, though they may not meet those qualifications yet, has such that desire before them, that they're saying, I want to come to the time that I'm qualified to serve as an elder to be able to watch out and help others get to heaven by watching out for their souls. By admonishing the flock, we ask you, brothers, to respect those who labor among you that are over you and admonish you. They're admonishing the flock. They're shepherding the flock. Again, that has to do in part with what is fed to them. But shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight. Not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you. Not for shameful gain, but eagerly. Which, by the way, that would go on to explain the attitude necessary to be willing to serve in that capacity and to not do so for shameful gain, but eagerly, for the desire for the work, and not with improper motives. But part of that work he mentions there is shepherding the flock, making sure they're properly fed, as we said earlier. And then Acts 20:25, supporting the weak. And now behold, I know that none of you see my face. That's the wrong passage. We go on later on in verse 29 beginning. He talks about them looking out for those that are there and weak, and again we use the illustration. As he talks about, as the illustration is used of elders and shepherds, is that they're looking out for the flock, for the ones that are weak, to help them to grow stronger, and to help them make sure that they're not devoured by the wolves that are out there watching and waiting. So, what are signs of the church? Described in the scripture organized well. There's a desire by the congregation to have elders. Men have a desire to serve as elders, and they're always looking out among themselves for qualified men. Even though we have elders now, we need to be looking for others who might become qualified. Because we should encourage those men who have the potential to serve as elders. That may be down the road many years, but we should be encouraging them now, building them up now, to work hard to meet those qualifications, to be what they need to be, to serve in that capacity down the road. Okay. All too often do churches have elders and become complacent with where they are and not begin to look for the future. And not begin to prepare people now to fill those roles later. Which brings us to our final point. What size of churches try to be scripturally organized? There are young men who aspire to be elders. And we say, what's the difference here? You say we talk about men desiring to serve as elders and young men aspiring. Well, here's the difference. Understanding it starts young. 1 Timothy 3 and verse 1. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of the overseer, he desires a noble task. We talk about desire, by the way. Let's go back to that first word now, aspire. Again, if anyone aspires to the office of an overseer, he desires a noble task. The ESV says. The NIV says, here's a trustworthy saying. Whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. There's an aspiration. There's a desire there for serving in that capacity. That word means to eagerly desire to accomplish some goal or purpose. That's the idea of aspiring. To serve in that capacity. Eagerly desiring to accomplish some goal or purpose. Now, we'll look at some ways it's translated. It's translated coveted after or craving. And you say, well, that's bad. It's bad in the context of 1 Timothy 6 to be coveting something. But when somebody covets something, they have that desire for something to get whatever it is. And the point in the use of this word to talk about aspiring to that goal of elders is saying that's the type of desire one has. To get there. They're working hard. They're working for that. Right, one that covets wants something. They intentionally want something. They're craving something. And the idea here is that the one is aspiring for that office. They want that office. To get to that. To be qualified so they can help others get to heaven. But not only is it rendered coveted after, it's rendered desire. In Hebrews 11 and verse 16, the passage familiar to us. But as it is, they desire a better country. That word desire. The desire that Moses had, the patriarchs had to go to heaven, that's the kind of desire a man needs to have to serve in the capacity of an elder and work towards that. Let me share with you a quote by H.E. Phillips in his book, Scripturally, Elders and Deacons. He said, this word declares great ambition, a strong yearning for something. It also expresses effort being made toward that desire or ambition. In fact, this word includes the action toward the goal as well as the desire of the heart. This desire, or a God eye, stretching out to touch the ground, must begin early in life because it cannot usually be accomplished in short time. Parents should begin early in the lives of their sons to plant within the heart's desire to develop into much needed eldership. I said earlier, sometimes the problem we run into is we become complacent with where we're at, and we don't always try to look out for those who may become qualified in the future. But another problem is sometimes men say, I have the desire to serve as an elder, but we wait until it's too late. Most of the qualifications given of elders in Titus chapter 1 and in 1 Timothy chapter 3 are qualifications that can be met from a fairly young age. There are qualifications that one can meet at a fairly young age. Obviously, being an elder or being elderly. Obviously, not being a recent convert may not be one that may not be true yet. Raising faithful children may not be one that's true yet. But most of those responsibilities are things that you can work for and can reach to a degree. Now, there's obviously varying degrees in some of these things, but reach to a degree at a young age. Even those that cannot be reached when one is younger, the work and the foundations that are laid when one is younger are going to impact your ability to meet those later on. The husband of one wife who has a faithful wife, that decision is not made 15 years after you get married. That decision is made when you're dating. Raising faithful children is the decision that's made when your children reach 13, 14, 15, and then to be thinking about it. That decision is made with the foundation we lay from a young age. And what we need to understand is, unfortunately, all too often in their congregation, they don't have a plurality of been qualified, and I think that's in part because all too often do we wait until it's too late to start working towards and aspiring towards that goal. Listen again to what he said, to what A.T. Phillips said, and I think he's right. This desire, this stretching out to touch or grasp, must begin early in life because it cannot usually be accomplished in short time. Parents should begin early in the lives of their sons to plant within their hearts a desire to develop much needed eldership. When we're 50, 60 years old and we say, now, you know what, I'm going to do that. It's often too late. The decisions one makes when they're younger will impact their ability to serve. Well, how do you know a church has that desire? Because they're instilling in young men the importance of serving in the capacity of elder, instilling in young women the importance of serving as elders' wives. And that reminder doesn't just prepare the future for now or 10 years from now, but for 40 or 50 years from now. To have a foundation laid so that a church can be scripturally organized not just now, for years to come. How do we build better local churches? Well, one of the ways we do that is by striving to be scripturally organized. Even when we are, like as we are here, striving to work to have that as a goal, not just for now, but for the future. Churches need to be scripturally organized. It's God's plan, not man's plan. And we want to follow God's plan for the organization of the church. Now, as we come to a close this morning in the sermon, we haven't been talking about the plan of salvation. But if you're here and you've heard the Word of God and you do believe that Jesus is the righteous Son of God, He lays out in His Word what He would have us to do. Would you repent of your sins, as Acts 17, 30, and 31 point out? Would you confess your faith in Him, as Romans 10, 9, and 10 point out? And if you bury in the waters of baptism, rising and walking in newness of life. So this evening, Lord willing, we'll talk about Matthew 24 and what we learn about that and about Christ's return. But the fact is, He could return this afternoon, we may not do that tonight. Or our life can be taken from us. So if you're here and you realize you need to make a change, why not make that decision this morning and obey the gospel? Maybe you're here and you've done it somewhere online and say, I'm not as faithful as I needed to be. If it's a sin of a private nature, take it from a private nature prayer. If it's a sin of a public nature, you decide the prayers of the congregation. We'll gladly pray with you before you forgot to read. No matter what your need is, witness history in any way. Why not report right now? Stand and stand after